the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week. And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua. And, we've had a little technical difficulty back there, but, we're here right now. We're joining you guys, and we're going to have a little fun today because the question for today is, have you ever wondered how you can, you know, take heartbreak to becoming a world-renowned comedian, podcast, and author? And how do you even how do you take heartbreak into success? Well, using that pain as a sort of catalyst for your life success. Because Rosie, our guest for today, is the perfect guest to answer that question. Rosie Wilby is an award-winning UK comedian, writer, and podcaster. Her latest book, The Breakup Monologues, is based on her acclaimed podcast, which is also a British Podcast Award nominee, of course. And she is a published globally on Bloomsbury. She is nicknamed the Queen of Breakups. Ladies and gentlemen, you probably will resonate with some topics out here today, and speaks about ethical human relationships everywhere, from comedy clubs, conferences, and festivals to sex parties. And to this episode today, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Rosie, for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I mean it's an interesting topic, and a lot of your listeners might be wondering why we're talking about this topic in the context of business. And of course, there is a really transferable lesson in actually how we can harness adversity and heartbreak, and as you say, use it to power some kind of reinvention and transformation and some kind of positive catalyst for change, which we can do in our personal and intimate relationships, but also in our working professional relationships as well. So in fact, my book actually covers professional breakups and those most sort of abstract breakups as well, like when we break up with a particular situation that isn't serving us.
I love that. I love that. It's not just, intimate heartache. It's not just intimate, because we break up with our bosses too. We have career breakups as well. We get fired, we get let go, and that also hurts, and it's all relevant in whatever realm of heartache or heartbreak. And we are here to channel that heartbreak today. And you're going to teach us how to do that, Rosie. But before we really get into it, you've had a fascinating journey. Of course, you are an award-winning comedian and to now an author, a published author. Can you first tell us the story? What initially drew you to comedy, and how has it, helped you, overcome your heartbreaks and your breakups? And what inspired you to the breakup monologues? And how has this transformed into other avenues? What is the story of Rosie Wilby?
Well, it's quite a long story, but the Breakup Monologues podcast and then book really came about when a few years ago I was dumped by email. And as a comedian, I made a joke about it and said I felt much better after correcting her spelling. But in reality, it is this situation where we feel a huge loss of identity and loss of an imagined future.
Yes.
And as we've just said, that could apply in terms of a romantic relationship, as this was, or it could be a professional relationship, like you say, when we get let go, when we get made redundant or sacked, or fired. So yeah, there's all kinds of experiences in life where something comes to an end, perhaps when we weren't expecting it to, and then we have to reflect on why that has happened and how we can move forward. And sometimes those experiences are a real opportunity for personal growth. So I was really interested in that, and I think that comedians, particularly many of my friends on the circuit here in the UK that I've spoken to seem very skilled in harnessing that failure, because as comedians we have to think on our feet quite quickly, because if a comedy gig is going badly, you have to try and turn it around in the moment. If the microphone isn't working, or if the audience just don't like you, or if they're drunk or they're heckling, you have to sort of cope with that within probably a fairly short space of time. A typical comedy set might be about 20 minutes if it's a bill with multiple acts on. So you've really only got that time to try and turn a challenging situation into a triumph. So I think we become quite skilled at sort of failing better and learning a great deal from the gigs that go wrong, about what skills you want in your armory. Improvisational skills about responding to the audience, or responding to something that's happened in the room. Maybe something has fallen over and broken, or or whatever. But also perhaps learning the skills about how you want to see the room set up in the first place. I do so many events where actually the event organizer doesn't really know about how the chairs should be laid out for the audience. And you see a room set up, and like some people have their back to the stage, and you're like, no, everyone needs to be facing the stage.
Of course.
So it's even things like that. You start to have the confidence to ask for what you'll need to have a better show, and for everybody to have a better time. But when you're a rookie comedian just starting out, you don't realize these things.
I mean, I love how you pointed those factors out, because I mean, as for the non-comedians, we never really think about this, but I love how you also mentioned that first off, you kind of pick up like on the fly of learning how to adjust on the fly, right? Something happened, something bad, you have to quickly turn around and get the audience back to your side, and salvage the situation. And of course, those same skills can be applied to like getting fired, getting sacked, and getting dumped by email. It's something unimaginable to people, and of course it hurts at the same time. But I think this is why comedians are also good at that, what they do, because you have to be able to find the humor in it, right? But I think what makes comedians, that's why it's very, very difficult, is because if you can only find humor in it if you really unravel it for what it is, right? You're not able, the painful parts of it, the dark side of it, the really, really hard side of it, you have to be able to accept that in order for you yourself to start laughing, and then get other people to start laughing at it too. I think that's a very, very essential and underrated skill of comedians. But you also start talking about that, hey, I'm picking up seat arrangement skills too, because now I can ask for what I want. I love those factors, Rosie, and that's a concept that we would otherwise miss as non-comedians. And now you're telling us that you've taken all these skills, you've been able to harness this experience, and now you've written a book. You've written the breakup monologues. It blends humor with the science of heartbreak. And again, the story, of course, you were dumped by email, and and how did some of these, first of all, with that experience and with the inspiration of writing the book, what are some of the most surprising insights that you uncovered from this experience and breakups in general?
Well, yeah, it's a big question, and like you say, I've been particularly fascinated by the idea of combining humor with science, because I think it's really useful for all of us to understand the psychology of how our human brains work, because they're quite strange and complex instruments that are also
they never cooperate.
Weird.
They never cooperate.
That's right. And so we can often have very conflicting thoughts, whatever situations we're in. And I think comedy is quite a good platform and medium for highlighting those conflicts that come with being human. And that's why you often hear comedians using humor that is has a logic to it, but is completely surreal and almost illogical. But
Right.
there's something logical about it as well. And I think comedians highlight these contradictions that we all feel in our sort of internal monologues as we're going around doing our daily jobs and meeting up with friends and lovers and partners. So I think humor is part of our daily life. And I do think that really everyone, whatever your main job is, I think you probably should have a go at stand-up comedy to try and adapt and develop these sort of agile resilience skills,
Yes.
I call them.
Wow.
And like you say, the book really came about after I'd been doing this podcast for a few years and speaking to lots of interesting people, fellow comics, authors, scientists, psychotherapists, people who could understand a lot about breakups and heartbreak and recovery.
Right.
And I think some of the interesting things that have come up, apart from some of the very funny stories that just kind of make you laugh, some of the ridiculous and bizarre things people have done in the wake of a heartbreak, running out into the road naked to chase their escaping lovers down the road.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Some of the things I found interesting are how heartbreak can parallel withdrawing from an addictive drug, because we become very addicted to somebody that we spend a lot of time with, because particular chemicals are released in our brains. And like I say, our brains in some ways are quite primitive. And so when we're addicted to something, we just want more and more of it.
Yes,
We don't necessarily think, oh, this is bad to be addicted to this thing. We just want it. We want to have more of that thing. And so it's really interesting that many experts have noticed this parallel between people withdrawing from a chemical substance, from a drugs. It's very similar when we are breaking up with somebody and trying to withdraw from the relationship and not see that person anymore and cope with them not being there all of the time. I mean, many people, of course, do stay friends and stay amicable, but obviously they're not in each other's lives in the same very enmeshed way. So it's a big period of adjustment and change and chemical change in the brain and huge sort of physical upheaval in that sense. Our sleep will be disturbed, our eating habits. We've all been there in some way, whatever types of relationships we've had, whatever our identity is on a sort of sexual orientation spectrum and so on. We've all had those kind of feelings of rejection, and it's so very difficult to recover from. But I've also been really interested in behaviors of men and women, and how in heterosexual divorces, by far the majority of divorces are initiated by women. And then we see that sort of that bias really transferring over to same-sex couplings, now that we have in many parts of the world at least same-sex marriage. We do see that female couples actually divorce at many, many times the rate of male couples. So I found that super interesting.
That is interesting. I find that quite interesting. I first of all, before we dive into that, I love how you put it in the scientific terms, right? Because it's a chemical, physical upheaval. We are addicted. And I think that concept alone is quite helpful to our audience and listeners, because, it is an addiction, right? Because realizing that kind of like physical codependency, so to speak, right, is why we suffer from heartbreaks. And seeing it from that concept, I feel like it allows us to heal faster, right? And I want to talk a bit more about that healing, but is there a way where we can find, like, unravel a little bit of why divorces or breakups are initiated by the women more often than we think? That's quite very interesting. Can you unravel that a little bit for us, Rosie? And how do we come to terms with this when it comes to healing?
Well, it's very interesting, and it surprised me because it goes against much of our social conditioning and expectations about gender roles, because we tend to assume that men are the ones who might sort of stray, in inverted commas. We have these sort of cultural stereotypes that are deeply embedded, that men are the ones that sort of have affairs or, fall in love with a younger woman and go off. Whereas perhaps we are seeing women, either get tired of a partner being a pain. That could be women.
Of course,
women
that's
might
what.
just have women might have a lower patience threshold for
Yes.
some of the things that their partner is doing. But equally, I think there's an unacknowledged kind of thirst for novelty amongst women that socially we don't really acknowledge, because there are many experiments, and I sort of, for fun, I went along and took part in one of these experiments. It's an early chapter in the book where I really milk the humor from quite a weird situation where you go into these experiments where you're shown erotic imagery, and they're sort of measuring your physical arousal in a number of different ways. And it has been found that women have a much broader kind of sexual appetite, if you like, than they might admit to themselves. So their sexual orientation and the sort of the package that they put themselves in and how they label themselves and construct that identity socially. For example, you might say, I'm a heterosexual woman, or I'm a gay woman, or a bisexual woman. Often, we've put ourselves into quite a narrow box, and what you often see is women are actually turned on by all the images. Even if they're a heterosexual woman, they're also really turned on by looking at images of women. And I always thought I was a lesbian woman. I've mostly had my relationships with women, but actually I was really turned on by looking at men also, which was kind of interesting, because you often see that men have more of a correlation between what they say their identity is and what they actually physically seem to respond to. And we see more of a binary there. Obviously, bisexual men do exist, but we do see more of a polarity between men who are, turned on only by heterosexual imagery or only by homosexual imagery. And we do see more of a polarity, whereas all women pretty much seem to be turned on by everything, but we don't admit to it because of probably social constructs around how women are supposed to be.
We're kind of tiptoeing the line here a little bit, Rosie, with this topic, because it is quite, you can't be going like, women are a bit more, they're all over the place. We can't be saying stuff like that, but it makes, it's surprising to me, but at the same time, yes, because, part of what I was taught growing up is that, women want adventure. So we make things make the relationship interesting. That's why you take them out on dates, you plan trips, there's just an adventurous aspect to it, as far as men, we're simple, we want to be in our caves, we'll be fine, it's stuff like that. But again, it's a very tiptoey topic, because now we're delving into the realm of sexuality, where we're saying that women, it makes sense that if women are more would love the thought of the concept of adventure, then it also makes sense that it kind of correlates, not the causation, right? It correlates to the novelty aspect of attractiveness, attracted novelty, so to speak. And wow, what a way to kind of put that. And I don't think it's controversial at all, or I don't think it's offensive at all when we put it there. But like you said, it's a difficult conversation, because women are supposed to be proper. They're supposed to be, based on the standards set by the patriarchy. They're supposed to behave a certain way. They're not supposed to be all over the place and be turned on by everything. That's not supposed to be. That's not how life is. I love that concept. I'm glad that we got to talk about that a little bit, because I'm sure our audience and listeners would take value from that as well. To kind of delve us back a little bit more into the healing concept of breakups and how we apply this to our business and careers. And it also makes sense how women seem to succeed in a lot of fields as well. Of course, as far as ability goes and capacity goes, whether you're a career woman, a businesswoman, we women find just as much success there because they are interested in everything, so to speak, right? They can be good at everything as well. But now delving a little bit into
Although I think there is an interesting parallel, and I think a
yes,
lot of women like myself, we can spread ourselves quite thin. I mean, obviously, many women. I don't have children, but many women do, and obviously that takes a huge amount of energy and care and love.
yes,
So and still in many households, the woman is doing whatever jobs both
yes,
people are
yes,
doing, the woman
yes,
is often doing more,
yes, yes,
that is still
absolutely,
often the way it is, and
absolutely.
often getting paid less.
Mhm.
But I do think many of us do get so interested in lots of different things that we do find it harder to I mean, women can focus, don't get me wrong, but I think it's harder to specialize in the same way. For example, even in comedy, so many of my male comedy friends are just such comedy nerds. They consume comedy like all of the time. And I certainly know women like that. There's one in particular who is a massive comedy nerd and just always gigging or watching comedy or whatever. But a lot of women have other lives, and a lot of women put energy and effort into actually creating
Yes,
social groups and networks and
yes,
friendship groups within the comedy scene, and
yes,
kind of getting together with other comedians and talking about other stuff.
yes, yes,
So
yes.
it's quite interesting how in
Very
some
interesting.
ways, maybe if you really do that very unidirectional
Yeah.
kind of nerd out about
Mhm,
something, maybe in
mhm,
some ways you can progress
mhm,
faster.
mhm.
There's an interesting discussion there, isn't there, about
Of course.
whether sort of having a broader palette of interests, dilutes your
Yes.
energy somewhat or not.
Mhm.
Maybe it makes you a better, rounder, more complete whole person for people to actually work with and collaborate with.
Yes,
But
yes.
there's sometimes a compromise and a sacrifice and a
Yes,
cost
a
attached
cost to
to
that.
having a broad palette
I
of
love that.
interests.
And there's a correlation to it. Again, I wanted to correlate that somehow to the interest in novelty. There's just interesting everywhere. And at the same, I feel like we can serve the same in business, right? But again, I kind of want to steer us back to the breakups when it comes to career and business as well. And of course, nerding out on humor, on comedy, where both men and women are just as good. But how about humor for healing in particular, regardless of personal, regardless of career? How do you see the effectiveness of humor as a way to heal? Um, in general, do you find any or do you find any particular difference with how men cope with humor or how women cope with humor as well? Or is it really more like just making people laugh, addressing serious issues, and using that for personal growth? How does that work?
I think it's very human, and I think that's fairly universal.
Hmm.
I mean, there may be some nuanced differences about how and when we deploy that humor,
Hmm.
but I think in general it's a human thing to seek some kind of respite from feeling sad or
Yes.
angry or confused or hurt about something,
Hmm.
and we do seek to make a joke about it, just as I did when I said, "Oh, I felt much better once I corrected her spelling
Hmm.
and punctuation and changed the font when nerding out about her breakup email." Um, so I think that's pretty universal, and I think it is this way, this coping mechanism, and I think there's a balance to be found between using it as a complete defense against actually doing the work that you might need to do, the reflection that you need to do, either with a professional, with a
Right.
therapist, or with
Right.
friends or your support group, um, or yeah, you might sort of be using humor in the wrong way and actually
Yes.
just completely using it as a deflection. But
Yes.
um, yeah, I think we all do it, and I think that's pretty universal. And I think it is just in terms of how, I think we do it fairly instinctively. I don't think
Yes.
there's necessarily a sort of guidebook or a step
Hmm.
by step. This
Hmm.
is how you use humor to process trauma. I think we've all, probably everybody could think of an instance like my
Yes.
breakup email
Yes.
where we have sought to make that sort of slightly dark, slightly dodgy, can I really say this,
Hmm.
joke.
Yeah.
I mean, and often we do in response to, global events. I mean,
I
when
love
we
that.
had the pandemic,
Hmm.
obviously people started making jokes about the lockdown, about
Lockdowns.
face masks, because how do you get through it? You've got to sort of
Absolutely.
find some dark humor in this really
Absolutely.
bizarre experience we're all going through.
Probably the best example of the global use of comedy for a global trauma that we were all going through in common, and I love that. I love how you say it's instinctive. Yes, there might be a different way of people coping. Maybe it's a wrong way of coping. Maybe it's an effective way of coping, but it's instinctive to use humor to heal because we just need to laugh about things sometimes. Rosie, I would love you to be able to close us off with a story. Tell us a story that tells about this instinctive application of healing using humor. Except your stories, of course, except your email story. But talk to us a little bit about a story, this a relationship that sticks out for you, something a favorite of yours, and take us home with that.
Oh my goodness. Well, um, I suppose a story that I like telling a lot
Hmm.
is how, I mean, you mentioned at the top that I have even been known to do comedy at a sex party, which
Hmm.
was an interesting event.
Hmm.
But that was probably one experience where I learnt the most about boundaries and a number
Oh,
of principles that are
interesting.
transferable
Uh-huh.
to
Uh-huh.
our daily working lives or daily kind of lives out and about in the world.
Hmm.
um, Nothing to do with kind of sexual intimacy.
Of course.
um, and so I always think it's this really kind of quite comedic kind of setup that I was doing comedy at this cabaret before, a kind of sex positive space,
Uh-huh.
or a
Hmm.
sex room, if you like,
Hmm.
that was cordoned off, was going to be opened up for people to go in and do do whatever they wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, on entering the space, we had to sign up to a sort of charter of rules of,
Hmm.
um,
What not to
always
do.
get consent,
Hmm.
respect people's boundaries.
Hmm.
And also, there was a sense of mutual accountability because you couldn't enter the space without what they call a pal, which is somebody who
Oh,
will vouch for
interesting.
your behavior,
Interesting.
and
Mhm.
will say, look, if they're getting drunk or being weird, I'll take them home. And I just thought,
Yes.
wouldn't that be great kind of sense of accountability to foster in all situations? I
Yes,
mean,
I
it's
was. Mhm.
it's sort of super necessary in that case. But so I suppose I slightly veered onto a slightly different question there, but I just thought that's a kind of funny story of doing comedy in a very unusual setting for me. Normally, it's kind of literature and science and
Uh-huh,
arts
uh-huh.
festivals and book festivals and comedy clubs, and places where I'm kind of signing books and having very sort of cerebral conversations with
Yes,
people afterwards, recording
yes.
podcasts and all of these kind of things. But this was a very different and out there
Yeah.
experience that was very funny in many ways. And I did sort of have to apply some humor to the
Of
situation because
course.
it was quite
Out there. Out
socially
there.
awkward for me.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. It's proof that uh comedy is universal in any social setting. It could apply, and we could lighten the mood with humor whichever way we want. I love how you said that the rules that apply to parties like that, why not apply in real life? It's a very, a buddy system, accountability, rules, consent. I mean, wow, those are things that we really need today in our society. And I love how you pointed that out, Rosie. Rosie, it's been great. I mean, I'd love to do a longer show with you, maybe talk about a little more about all the funny stories that you have with us. But thank you for sharing all the insight. And I love that we got to unravel a little bit there. I'd love to give you this opportunity. Where can we find you? Where can we connect with you? Where can we find your book? And of course, your award-winning podcast as well.
Well, I would love people to listen to the Breakup Monologues. It's on all good podcast platforms. We've actually had a little break this year from releasing episodes whilst I've been writing a novel to follow my 2 nonfiction books. So apologies that we have had a little break. We're back recording again at festivals later this year in the UK. But there's a whole archive of nearly 100 episodes that you can listen to. So do give those a listen. I particularly recommend the episode with Zoe Lyons and Hal Cruttenden and BB Lynch.
Wow.
That is a really wonderful, funny episode that we recorded in Brighton, which is just not too far from London here. And that was really, really fun and quite an uplifting episode. And the book, The Breakup Monologues, is available from all your good retailers. It's online on Amazon and all the main sites. It's also an audiobook narrated by me, which is, it's important to say that's very different from the podcast, because the podcast is more of a live show that is played for laughs and entertainment value, whereas the book does bring in all the science and my own story and has a real narrative drive. So it's less episodic than the podcast, which obviously a podcast naturally is.
Yes.
But if you want to follow a whole story of me learning all about the science and the psychology and all of that kind of stuff and applying it to various situations, then the book is the way to go, and the audiobook is narrated by me as well.
Oh, wow, of course. And I invite all our audience and listeners out there to check out all of that. Check out the website, check out the podcast. I will definitely hop on over there, listen to that episode recommendation. Of course, the book, I love how you said that, it's more in depth. We could get to understand a bit more, unravel a bit more of the science that we sort of started talking about on here as well. Thank you for that opportunity. Rosie, thank you for the insight today. I absolutely enjoyed it. I want more. I would love to have you back on the show. But Rosie, thank you so much. One last bit of wisdom. Take us home.
Well, when we've been chatting, I was just thinking of the old saying that tragedy plus time equals comedy. And I think that is really applicable, isn't it, to what we've been talking about? So
very true.
Yeah, once you've had time to process something that has happened to you, then that is when you're really in the best place to turn it into a humorous story and look back on it with that sense of humor and fun, and you're able to feel slightly more light-hearted about it. And let's hope. I mean, I know some situations are very, very sad and challenging and difficult, but there often is a little bit of humor that can help you through, and in particular once a little time has passed and you've managed to, hopefully with the support of people around you, get yourself through that really tough bit.
I love that. I love that I asked you that one last bit question. Tragedy plus time equals comedy. What a way to close this episode. Rosie, thank you for joining us today. And to all our audience listeners out there, thank you for watching the episode.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.